The smell of hickory-smoked ribs filled the air. My Bluetooth speaker blasted Old School Soul, and I had just sunk my teeth into the juiciest rack of meat I'd ever cooked when she appeared. There she was, storming up my driveway like a suburban war general on a mission to assassinate joy. Diana, the president of the HOA, armed with a clipboard, a scowl sharp enough to slice brisket, and the kind of fury usually reserved for natural disaster. She didn't even knock. She stood in the middle of my yard, hands on hips, glaring at my smoker like it had personally offended her ancestors. I didn't even have time to swallow before she barked. This unauthorized gathering violates Article 14, Section B of the HOA Covenant, and I will be filing a formal complaint. I blinked at her, still chewing, still confused, trying to figure out how barbecue had suddenly become a criminal offense. And just like that, my peaceful Sunday turned into the opening scene of a neighborhood war that would escalate beyond anything anyone could imagine. Let me rewind 24 hours. It was Saturday morning. The sky was clear, and the birds were chirping like background music from a feel-good movie. I had my whole weekend planned. Marinate the ribs, clean the grill, invite a few friends over, and embrace the divine simplicity of meat, smoke, and laughter. You see, I'm not just any backyard barbecue guy. I take this seriously. I've got thermometers that sync to my phone, a smoker I imported from Texas, and a spice rack that could put a small restaurant to shame. I don't do chaos. I do ribs. I don't cause drama. I cause hunger. That's why when I saw Diana jogging by during my pre-grill lawn mow, I gave her a friendly wave. She didn't wave back. She just slowed down, narrowed her eyes at my smoker like it was plotting treason, and muttered something into her Apple Watch. I should have known then, but I was naive. I still believed in good neighborliness. The grill prep was perfect. Rubs had set in overnight. The coals were ready, and the guest list was tight. Just close friends and a few cool neighbors who knew how to bring a side dish and mind their business. By 3 p.m., the backyard was alive. Kids were playing cornhole. My friend Mark brought over his homemade peach bourbon sauce. And even old man Jerry from across the street showed up with a tray of deviled eggs and war stories from the 70s. It wasn't a party. It was a vibe. Until the vibe got drop-kicked by Diana. She didn't walk. She marched. Her wedge heels crunched across my gravel path with the precision of a SWAT team raid. Clipboard in hand, Bluetooth headset flashing like a warning signal. She approached me like I'd stolen government secrets. "Mr. Thompson," she began, using my last name like we were in court. "This gathering exceeds the noise ordinance set forth in the HOA guidelines. You have not submitted a noise permit, nor have you complied with grill smoke containment regulations." I genuinely thought she was joking. I laughed. Big mistake. Her eyebrows twitched like she was accessing her final form. "Do you think this is a joke? This is a serious infraction. That smoke is drifting over into my azaleas. Now, I want you to understand something. I live in a neighborhood that claims to be a community. We have potlucks. We wave when we see each other at the mailbox. Kids sell lemonade without permits, and no one calls the cops. But ever since Diana became HOA president last year, it's like we've been living under a suburban dictatorship. She's fined people for unapproved wind chimes, gave a warning to a guy with a garden gnome, and even tried to ban inflatable Christmas decorations for being too garish. And now she was trying to shut down ribs. I tried to reason with her. I offered her a plate. She looked at it like I had served her roadkill. "I don't eat charred carcinogens," she said. Then she pulled out a measuring tape and started measuring the distance from my grill to the property line. I kid you not. She didn't even ask permission, just started measuring and writing things down like she was compiling evidence for the Supreme Court. By now, the entire barbecue had gone quiet, watching this showdown unfold like it was a Netflix special. Mark whispered, "She did this to the Johnsons too." They threw a New Year's party and found a noise citation in their mailbox the next morning. When Diana finally left after threatening to file multiple HOA violations, environmental hazard complaints, and even suggesting I undergo a grill safety course, everyone was too stunned to speak. I tried to laugh it off. I even made a toast to community conflict and Diana's eternal unhappiness. I joked, but the air had changed. And when I woke up the next morning, the shift became official. Taped to my smoker was a bright orange paper, an HOA cease and desist order, written in bold block letters. No signature, just the HOA logo and a list of violations that read like a parody. Excessive smokiness, unauthorized food-based gathering, unregulated rib distribution. I stood there staring at that ridiculous list, ribs still marinating in the fridge, as the sun rose over my backyard battlefield. That was when I knew this wasn't about HOA rules. This was personal. This was a challenge. And I don't back down from a challenge, especially not one that threatens my right to meet. The thing about suburban life is people think it's quiet, boring. But just beneath the surface lies a jungle of passive aggression, lawn envy, and turf wars fought with recycling bins and overly enthusiastic newsletters. Diana had just started a fire she couldn't contain. Because if she wanted a battle over barbecue, I was ready to smoke the competition. Literally. And so, with one hand on my smoker and the other on my phone, I began planning not just a barbecue, but a statement. If Diana didn't want me grilling in my backyard, then fine. I'd find a new location. Maybe a public park, maybe a friend's yard. Or maybe, just maybe, I'd throw the biggest, boldest, most unapologetic cookout this neighborhood had ever seen, right on her front lawn. Because sometimes, when life gives you Dianas, you give them coleslaw and chaos. By the time Monday morning rolled around, I had already reread the cease and desist letter 5 times, each pass making me angrier than the last. It wasn't just the ridiculous violations listed. Unregulated rib distribution still haunted me, but the sheer audacity of it all. Diana wasn't just enforcing rules, she was weaponizing them. This wasn't about smoke, noise, or safety. This was about control. I stood in front of my smoker, the crime scene of flavor, and made a decision. If Diana wanted a battle, I was ready to raise the stakes and turn up the heat. The first step was information gathering. I wasn't about to start some wild rebellion without knowing my rights. So, I did what any rational person would do. I bribed Mark with smoked turkey legs to dig through his storage boxes for the original HOA bylaws. Mark used to be a paralegal before he retired to a life of golf and conspiracy theories, so this was his kind of fun. We spread the documents out on his garage workbench like we were planning a heist. It was all in tiny print and legalese. But Mark had his glasses on, a cold beer in hand, and the determination of a man who'd been fined once for using a non-HOA-approved shade of beige on his shutters. Within an hour, we found the loophole. Nowhere in the bylaws did it specify where one couldn't host a neighborhood cookout, only that large gatherings must not obstruct communal pathways or impede traffic on public roads. Driveways, it turned out, were a legal gray area, especially ones that weren't fully owned by the HOA. I started laying the groundwork for my plan. The group chat was the first order of business. I created a WhatsApp group titled Operation Smoke Show and carefully invited only the real ones, the neighbors who had suffered under Diana's reign of pettiness. Mrs. Patel, who got a violation for hanging wind chimes that were too melodic. The Martins, whose kids were once fined for using sidewalk chalk on their own property. Even Stan, the local mailman, joined the chat and said, "I've been delivering Diana's hate mail for years. Count me in." What started as a few grumbles and laughing emojis quickly turned into something bigger. People were tired. Tired of being told their grass was half an inch too high. Tired of surprise inspections. Tired of living in fear of pastel-colored violation slips taped to their front doors. The HOA was supposed to protect us, not patrol us, and Diana had forgotten that. Power in the wrong hands always ends in revolution. My plan was simple but bold. Host a massive, neighborhood-wide cookout in Diana's driveway. Not next to it, not across from it, in it. Right in front of the woman who tried to extinguish joy like it was a fire hazard. Timing was everything. We chose Saturday, for days away, which conveniently aligned with the HOA's quarterly property inspection. That meant Diana would be expecting silence, trimmed lawns, and properly aligned trash bins. What she'd get instead was a full-scale food festival featuring ribs, brisket, grilled corn, DJ Chuck from 3 blocks over, and hopefully, a little chaos. I started assigning roles like a general preparing for battle. Mark and his son would handle the logistics, setting up canopies, extension cords, and crowd control. The Patels offered to cook samosas and provide folding chairs. Stan the mailman, now the unofficial hype man of our group, promised to deliver handmade invites to every house not currently under Diana's thumb. By Wednesday, the buzz was real. People were messaging me privately, asking if they could bring their own dishes, wondering if pets were allowed, if their cousins from out of town could attend. One neighbor offered to bring a bounce house. Another volunteered a cotton candy machine. It was snowballing fast. This wasn't just a petty response to Diana anymore. It was becoming a statement, a declaration that the soul of the neighborhood didn't belong to an iron-fisted HOA president, but to the people who lived in it, loved it, and grilled in it. But I had to be careful. Diana was smart. She knew how to sniff out rebellion like a bloodhound trained on the scent of noncompliance. I kept everything low-key on my end. No strange deliveries, no setting up tents in advance, no obvious planning. Meanwhile, Mark made copies of the bylaws with key passages highlighted in neon. We even consulted Steve, the ex-military guy on the corner, who said he'd supervise the event as a security detail, and brought out his old whistle and folding chair like he was back in basic training. Then came Thursday. That morning, Diana knocked on my door for the first time ever. Not barged in, knocked. I opened it cautiously, half expecting another letter or maybe a bucket of water for my grill. Instead, she smiled. It was a tight, suspicious smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just checking in," she said, her voice sugary but laced with arsenic. "Heard a little chatter about another barbecue. Thought you'd have learned your lesson." I played dumb, shrugged. "Just doing some yard work this weekend. You know, HOA inspection and all." She narrowed her eyes. "Good. Let's keep it that way." As soon as she left, I texted the group chat. "She suspects nothing. Proceed." By Friday night, the neighborhood was buzzing with quiet energy. Cars were being loaded with supplies. Coolers were prepped. Generators were checked. The final step was to get permission from the one person who could legally blow this entire operation up, Diana's ex-husband, Rick. According to Mark's research, Rick still owned half the property line, including half of the driveway. Rick lived 2 streets over in a modest house that looked like it hadn't been HOA approved in decades. The lawn was wild, the paint was faded, and a giant metal rooster stood in the front yard. We figured it was worth a shot. Rick answered the door wearing a grill sergeant apron and holding a wrench. When I explained what we were planning and why, he laughed so hard he dropped the wrench. "That woman once tried to evict me from my own garage for parking a boat I didn't even own," he said between laughs. "You have my blessing. Hell, I'll bring the smoker." Just like that, we had our legal trump card. Diana might be president of the HOA, but Rick was still king of half her driveway. As I went to bed that night, I stared at my ceiling, a grin spreading across my face. We were ready. The grills were cleaned, the speakers were charged, the food was prepped, the invites were delivered, and the spirit of rebellion was marinated and resting overnight. In less than 12 hours, we'd flipped the script and the burgers on the most controlling woman this neighborhood had ever known. And the best part? She wouldn't see it coming until the first wave of grill smoke hit her begonias. The morning of the cookout dawned with a palpable tension in the air, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. I rose early, feeling both excitement and trepidation swirling in equal measure. The plan had been set in motion, every detail meticulously arranged, and yet the stakes felt impossibly high. I took a long, deep breath as I stepped outside, my eyes already scanning the horizon for any sign of interference. The neighborhood was unusually quiet, as though everyone was waiting for the inevitable explosion of smoke, music, and laughter that would soon shatter the calm of Diana's meticulously manicured world. By mid-morning, a convoy of cars started to roll in. Neighbors who had long suffered in silence now arrived armed with coolers, foldable chairs, and an assortment of dishes that ranged from spicy wings to sweet apple pie. The driveway, which had once been a symbol of Diana's unyielding authority, now became our battleground and sanctuary. The half of the driveway legally owned by Diana's ex-husband, Rick, served as our designated space, and it was there that we began setting up the grills and tents. The air buzzed with whispered plans and shared excitement, and even the usually stoic faces of the older residents betrayed a flicker of youthful rebellion. The first sign that the operation was underway came when the unmistakable aroma of grilling meat began to fill the air. It wasn't just any meat. It was a carefully curated selection of marinated ribs, sizzling sausages, and a few experimental skewers that combined unexpected flavors. The grills roared to life, their flames licking the early sunlight, and the smoke began to curl upward like a signal flare. Conversations merged with the sizzling sounds of meat hitting the grill, forming a background symphony that both celebrated freedom and defied the oppressive calm that had defined the neighborhood for too long. As the cookout ramped up, Diana's presence became all the more evident. She had arrived, of course, in her usual manner, briskly and with an air of indignation. However, this time her approach was different. Instead of barging into my yard and unleashing a tirade, she stood at the edge of the driveway, her face a mix of disbelief and fury as she took in the scene. I watched her from a distance as she scanned the gathering, her eyes narrowing with each passing moment. It was as if she were witnessing a revolution in real time, a grassroots uprising that challenged everything she had built her authority on. Despite her disapproving glare, the mood among the revelers remained light. Laughter and animated conversation filled the space between the clatter of dishes and the hum of a nearby radio playing a mix of classic hits. I could see that many of my neighbors, who had once cowered under the weight of her endless citations and petty fines, were now unburdened by that constant pressure. They moved freely, exchanging hearty greetings and clinking glasses in celebration of a newfound unity. The air, heavy with smoke and anticipation, was charged with an energy that promised to redefine our community for the better. The event took an unexpected turn when Diana's ex-husband, Rick, made his entrance with a swagger that instantly transformed the atmosphere. He rolled in on his old pickup truck, a broad grin on his face and a portable smoker in tow. He parked right in the middle of the driveway, as if to emphasize that the power dynamics had irrevocably shifted. His arrival sent waves of cheers through the crowd, and for a moment, it felt like the entire neighborhood was reclaiming a piece of its dignity. Rick's presence was a bold reminder that the rules Diana so obsessively enforced were nothing more than paper barriers when faced with the collective will of a community that refused to be intimidated. Amidst the jubilant chaos, there was a palpable sense of high stakes. The air was filled not only with the aroma of grilled delicacies, but also with the quiet determination of those who had grown tired of living in fear of arbitrary violations. I could see a flicker of resolve in the eyes of every participant. This was more than just a cookout. It was a statement. We were saying, without words, that our homes, our traditions, and our right to enjoy life on our own terms were not up for negotiation. Every clink of a plate, every burst of laughter, and every shared anecdote was a small victory over the tyranny that had for so long cast a shadow over our daily lives. Then, as the afternoon progressed, the first real confrontation occurred. A small group of Diana's loyal enforcers from the HOA, faces set in grim determination, arrived at the scene. Their presence was meant to intimidate, to reassert the strict order that had been imposed on our community. For a brief moment, the festive mood wavered. I stepped forward, calm yet resolute, and engaged them in conversation. I reminded them of the very bylaws they were supposed to uphold, noting the legal loopholes we had all so meticulously researched. The discussion quickly escalated from a tense negotiation to an impromptu debate about fairness, individual rights, and the real purpose of community governance. The onlookers gathered around, their murmurs swelling into a collective roar of support. Even the HOA enforcers, faced with the unexpected unity and passion of our group, hesitated and then slowly retreated, leaving us to our celebration. The day continued with an almost surreal blend of mirth and defiance. Music, laughter, and the crackling of the grills became the soundtrack of a neighborhood determined to rewrite its story. Old grudges and petty grievances melted away as families shared meals and neighbors discovered common ground in the warmth of shared rebellion. I moved among the groups, collecting stories and watching as even the most timid residents transformed into outspoken advocates for change. It was as if the smoke had a magical quality, lifting the weight of years spent under the oppressive glare of unwarranted regulations and replacing it with a collective hope for a more inclusive and free community. At one point, as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, I found myself standing beside Diana, who had isolated herself at the edge of the gathering. Her eyes, still burning with indignation, softened ever so slightly as she watched the people around her. In that fleeting moment, there was a glimmer of something unexpected, a spark of regret, or perhaps a realization that the strict rules she upheld might have cost her the very community she was meant to serve. I couldn't be sure, and I didn't dare push further, but it was a reminder that even the most unyielding figures could sometimes be human. As twilight descended, the cookout reached its peak. The grills continued to sizzle, the conversations grew louder, and the neighborhood's transformation was complete. What had begun as a planned act of defiance had evolved into an overwhelming celebration of freedom and community spirit. Every bite of tender meat, every shared joke, and every moment of collective joy was a rebuke to the outdated systems that had once controlled us. I knew that regardless of the legal battles that might follow, this day would be remembered as a turning point, a moment when the power of unity and good food triumphed over authoritarian decrees. The aftermath of the cookout was like the calm after a thunderstorm, peaceful on the surface, but you could feel the tension crackling in the background. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers and laughter, the kind that carried just a bit more confidence than before. For the first time in what felt like years, people walked their dogs without fear of being cited for leash length. Kids chalked rainbows on the sidewalk without having to look over their shoulders. Lawn gnomes mysteriously reappeared in yards that had once been stripped bare by Diana's crusade for uniformity. It was as if the entire block had collectively exhaled and remembered what it felt like to actually enjoy living there. But we all knew it couldn't last, not without consequences. Not with Diana still lurking behind those pristine curtains, probably plotting revenge in between sips of her flavorless herbal tea. It didn't take long. The official letter arrived 2 days later. It was thicker than the cease and desist notice and stamped with the HOA's emblem in dramatic, embossed ink. I opened it on my porch while sipping coffee, already suspecting it wouldn't contain anything good. Inside was a formal complaint filed against me, accusing me of organizing an unauthorized public event, obstructing private property, and inciting what was dramatically referred to as a neighborhood-wide insurrection against the governing body. The phrasing was so absurd I laughed out loud. The HOA board was summoning me to an emergency disciplinary hearing, and I was instructed to attend or face immediate penalties, including fines and suspension of community privileges. What those privileges were exactly, no one could ever explain, probably just the right to walk through the neighborhood without being glared at. Word of the hearing spread fast. The WhatsApp group went into overdrive. Neighbors offered to testify, submit photos, and even show up in matching shirts that read, "I plead the fifth rib." Mark suggested we livestream it. Rick offered to represent me legally, even though his only courtroom experience involved small claims court and a parking ticket from 1998. We laughed, but we also understood the stakes. This wasn't just about me. This was about whether the HOA could still operate under Diana's iron rule or if the neighborhood had finally reached its breaking point. We weren't just fighting a fine. We were fighting for the soul of our street. The day of the hearing arrived with all the subtlety of a soap opera climax. The HOA meeting room, usually a drab and empty space where no one wanted to be, was packed. People brought folding chairs and snacks. Someone set up a portable speaker and played protest anthems until Diana stormed over and demanded they stop. She was dressed for war, power suit, low bun, glasses perched on her nose like a judge ready to deliver a death sentence. She didn't acknowledge anyone as she took her seat at the center of the long table, flanked by the remaining HOA board members, some of whom looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I stood at the opposite end, not in a suit or tie, but in my grill apron. It wasn't a joke, it was a statement. The apron read, "Smoking for Freedom," and had a ketchup stain I couldn't quite get out. Diana's lips tightened when she saw it. I could practically hear her molars grinding. She opened the proceedings with a voice that sounded like it had been dipped in vinegar. She read aloud the list of charges, her voice rising with each one, as if she expected the crowd to gasp or nod solemnly. But they didn't. They just sat there, arms folded, faces calm. Some even smirked. I waited until she was finished before stepping up to speak. I didn't make a long speech. I didn't yell. I simply explained that the event was held on private property with permission, that no laws had been broken, and that the community had come together because they were tired of being ruled by fear. I held up the bylaws with the highlighted sections, courtesy of Mark, and calmly pointed out the inconsistencies in her complaint. Then I passed around photos of the cookout, pictures of families smiling, neighbors laughing, kids playing with balloons. Not a single shot of chaos, damage, or disruption, just people enjoying life together. Then came the testimonies. One by one, neighbors stood and told their stories. The Patels talked about their windshield violation. The Martins described the time Diana had demanded they repaint their front door because the shade of blue wasn't community standard. Even Stan the mailman spoke, recounting the countless complaints Diana had filed over imagined offenses. Each story chipped away at her authority, revealing a pattern of pettiness and power trips disguised as governance. Diana tried to interject, claiming bias and irrelevance, but no one backed her. Even the board members began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. One of them, a quiet woman named Diane who had rarely spoken at previous meetings, finally raised her hand. She admitted she had once voted in favor of Diana's policies out of fear of reprisal, but after attending the cookout and seeing the joy it brought, she couldn't support her anymore. That moment shifted the entire room. It was as if someone had pulled back a curtain and let in light. Diana's composure began to crack. She argued that rules were rules, that structure was necessary, that without her guidance the neighborhood would fall into disarray. But her voice wavered, and her arguments no longer carried weight. It was clear the board was no longer on her side. They called a recess, and whispers filled the room as everyone waited. When they returned, the decision was unanimous. The charges against me were dismissed. Diana's authority was to be reviewed by a vote of no confidence. Until then, her position as HOA president was suspended. The room erupted in applause. People hugged, high-fived, and clapped me on the back. Diana, red-faced and tight-lipped, stormed out without a word. It was over. At least, we thought it was. I stepped outside into the sunlight, the weight of weeks finally lifting from my shoulders. But even as we celebrated, I couldn't shake the feeling that Diana wasn't finished. Someone like her didn't go quietly. She'd bide her time, plot her next move, and wait for the perfect moment to strike back. I didn't know how or when, but I knew one thing for sure. She wasn't done with me yet. Still, for that moment, we had won. The street felt different, lighter, brighter. People walked a little taller, smiled a little wider. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We were a community. And no matter what came next, we'd face it together, over ribs, laughter, and just the right amount of smoke. It had been a few weeks since the hearing, and the neighborhood had never felt more alive. For the first time in years, people actually talked to each other instead of hiding behind trimmed hedges and nervously nodding at block parties that felt more like corporate meetings. There were kids riding bikes up and down the street again. Music played from porches without the constant fear of a noise complaint. People painted their doors bold colors, planted strange but beautiful flowers, and added little quirks to their yards that once would have been fined into extinction. It was like everyone had collectively remembered this was supposed to be a place to live, not just a place to follow rules. And in the center of it all, I found myself busier than ever. After the great driveway cookout and Diana's subsequent fall from grace, something strange happened. People kept asking me when the next one would be. At first, I thought they were joking. Then I started getting texts from folks I barely knew, people from 2 neighborhoods over, asking if I did catering. Mark made a passing comment about how I should turn my barbecue into a business, and I laughed. But then Mrs. Patel offered to help design a logo, and Stan the mailman said he had a cousin who could print t-shirts cheap. Before I knew it, a simple cookout born from suburban rebellion was turning into something bigger than I'd ever imagined. So, I leaned into it. I applied for a small business license, bought a used trailer, and painted it myself with some help from a few very enthusiastic teenagers who promised to work for ribs. I called it Diana's Cookout Catering, not to be petty, but because everyone in town already referred to it that way. The logo featured a smoking grill with a tiny HOA badge being used as a coaster for a cold drink. It was subtle, but not really. Orders started rolling in. Weddings, birthdays, office lunches, even a small outdoor concert. What started as a one-time act of protest became my full-time gig. Of course, with each new success came that nagging thought in the back of my mind that Diana wasn't gone. Not really. She'd vanished for a while after the disciplinary hearing. Her house went dark, her car stayed in the garage, and her usual morning power walks were replaced by total radio silence. But I knew her too well. Diana didn't lose. She paused. She regrouped. She waited for the perfect time to reappear, armed with something petty, venomous, and somehow still printed in triplicate. And just when I began to feel like maybe she'd finally given up, she struck again. It came in the form of a letter, not a pink HOA violation, not a surprise inspection, but something worse, an envelope from the county clerk's office. Inside was a complaint filed by Diana, accusing me of running an illegal business out of a residential zone. She claimed I was creating a public nuisance, violating zoning regulations, and endangering the community with open flames and unlicensed food handling. It was an ambush in legal form. She wasn't trying to find me anymore. She was trying to shut me down completely. I stared at the letter, half expecting it to burst into flames. But after the initial wave of frustration, I took a breath. This time, I wasn't alone. I took the letter to Mark, who had recently declared himself chief of counterlegal strategy. We read through every word, highlighted every exaggeration, and dug into every claim. Most of it was flimsy, based on assumptions and twisted interpretations of code, but a few parts had teeth. If I didn't respond properly, Diana could cause real damage, not just to my business, but to my reputation. Diana's complaint was dismissed within a week. It didn't just backfire, it blew up in her face. The county not only approved my application, but added my name to the list of certified local food vendors for city events. The next week, I got a call from the Parks Department asking if I'd be willing to set up at the community fair. I said yes before they even finished the sentence. The event was a hit. People lined up for hours, and by the end of the night, I had nothing left but the scent of smoked meat and a tip jar full of crumpled bills and handwritten thank you notes. And then, just when I thought the story had peaked, something poetic happened. Diana's house went up for sale. The sign appeared on her lawn like a white flag of surrender. No explanation, no goodbye, just a cold, crisp for sale sign planted neatly between her manicured bushes. Word spread fast. Some said she was moving to Florida. Others whispered about a condo with stricter rules. No one really knew, and to be honest, no one really cared. The day the moving truck pulled up, the neighborhood gathered, not to jeer or throw a party, but to quietly witness the end of an era. She didn't wave goodbye. She didn't even open her blinds. She just left. A week later, we held a block party, not to celebrate her departure, but to celebrate each other. No drama, no rebellion, just food, music, and neighbors enjoying life. We grilled, we danced, we laughed. Kids ran barefoot. Grown-ups played cornhole, and Stan read a poem he'd written about barbecue and community. I looked around and saw a neighborhood reborn, not from chaos, but from unity. We didn't win because we fought back. We won because we stood together. Toward the end of the night, Mark raised a toast with a cup of lemonade. He cleared his throat and said, "To the man who turned one angry HOA letter into a business, a movement, and the best damn brisket this block has ever seen." People cheered. I raised my own cup, feeling equal parts overwhelmed and humbled. I never wanted to be a hero. I just wanted to grill in peace. But maybe that was the point. Sometimes, standing your ground over something small like barbecue can spark something bigger. As the sun dipped below the rooftops and the sky turned orange with the glow of twilight, I sat back in my chair, surrounded by the people I now considered family, and let it all sink in. One backyard barbecue, one determined Diana, and a whole lot of ribs had changed everything. The war was over, the grill was still hot, and for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt like home.